Architects don't always think of their practices as a brand, but in a changing economic and business landscape, how a studio presents itself is becoming increasingly important. Having recently gone through our own rebrand and strategic review at Arete, we've come to understand the value of treating an architecture practice like any other business, with a clear identity, voice, and purpose. In this episode, I sit down with Emily Stevens of Emily Stevens Studio, a highly regarded architecture brand designer and strategist, to discuss why building a strong brand matters in the design industry. Let's dive in. I'm sitting here today with Emily Stevens from Emily Stevens Studio, and we wanted to have a chat just about architecture branding, or just design branding, really, not just specialising in architecture, brand strategy, and getting your name out there and putting the best light behind yourselves to promote yourselves in what is a pretty competitive market. Emily, if you want to introduce yourself.
I'm Emily. So I'm a brand designer, and my studio does a mixture of brand strategy work and graphic design, basically. And, that equals pretty holistic brand identity, brand presence for my clients. And I work with architects, interior designers, an art gallery, that kind of thing.
Nice. I didn't realize you did art gallery stuff as well. What art gallery things have you done?
I'm working with the Atom, which is awesome because it's such a beautiful gallery. I have to do new identities for every new round of exhibitions, which is really exciting.
Right. And does that go everywhere from like the graphic stuff, posters, promotional things does it gallery layout design or anything like that? Or is it more to do with curators?
The curators would do the layout, and I just work with them to do internal signage. So making sure that all the typography and the signage is working with the placement of the art, and yes to everything else you just listed. So all the promo, the posters, and that kind of thing. So yeah, that's been fun.
Interesting. I didn't already on a tangent. So why architecture in general, or the designing for the design field? Like what drew you to that? Because it's interesting when you reached out to us. Oh, it'd be about 18 months ago now, maybe even longer.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
I had sort of in the back of my head thought that we might need a new visual direction, but kind of had no idea where to go with it. And then it was serendipitous that you kind of contacted me around that same time. We had coffee, and I didn't actually even realize that there were people specializing in your field, really. So it would just be interesting to know why you decided to kind of specialize in that designing for the design field in a way. It seems like quite a challenge, but obviously like really fruitful as well.
It happened pretty organically. That seems like a cop-out answer, but I think I just saw a need for it, and I knew I was well positioned to help. I guess I felt like I had really similar experience running my own design practice. And there were a lot of things that I learned, obviously, in design school, but there were other things that I learned about branding and marketing through running my own practice. And I'm passionate about architecture and interiors. And I guess I'm a collector of ideas and all that in that space. So it felt like a pretty natural area to move into.
Mm.
So yeah, a mixture of both interest and really knowing that I could help.
Is it because to me, and maybe it's a New Zealand thing, like it's always seemed like we're designers, we feel like we can do it ourselves, blah, 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 blah. Having gone through the process with you, how wrong I was to have that mindset. But is it more of is this kind of like more of a thing that's common overseas? Because it seemed to me that it was relatively uncommon here, maybe in particular in the architectural field, to kind of have brand strategists and designers on board to help kind of grow our businesses, be they small or large.
Yeah, I think New Zealand is probably slightly more, leaning towards DIY than other countries, more so than Australia. I work with about 50% Australian clients, 50% New Zealand clients. So that gives me a good intel into their market as well. I think that there's a lot of architects who think, I've got imagery of the work and that should be enough, right? I should be able to connect with people based on having that visual representation of what I've done. People are sort of realizing that isn't quite enough. The why is really because I see the need for it. And I think that the architecture industry is changing. It used to be built around prestige and names, like, oh, I really want to have X architect do my home because they have that name. And studios used to always have surname-based names as well. And we're seeing a move away from that, I think basically because it's not really enough anymore to connect on things that are a little bit deeper. And branding helps you do that. It's a bit of a bridge between you and the people you want to work with.
From our perspective, because as a relatively small and young practice, we needed to find a way to differentiate ourselves, really, or to kind of stand out amongst either very established or very well regarded or just very prominent crowd. We have for so long undersold the value of brand in doing that. And it's interesting, I think, kind of architecture in general, and it'd be interesting to get your take on whether this has been the case with other clients. It's always felt a bit dirty in a way to kind of promote ourselves through a branding mechanism. But it now seems to be much more of the norm. And we've been kind of celebrated for the direction that we've taken, courtesy of yourself. And, and like merchandising and things like that, people are like, oh, it's a cool idea. Why didn't we think of that? And I'm like, well, it's all there. It's all out there. It's all, we're not reinventing the wheel, but it does seem like it is reinventing the wheel a little bit for architecture. What do you think has been that change in mindset or that shift in comfort for us to take on that idea of brand being more important to the business? And is it more relevant to like the younger generation coming through, or do you see it across the board?
I think it's definitely more relevant to the younger practices, generally speaking, but I've had some older architect clients as well. So you can't really generalize, but I do think just because of what I said before, with like older school practices still going off of name, they're probably a little bit less likely to want to jump into a branding exercise, but it doesn't mean they wouldn't benefit, right? Everybody's going to benefit from going through this because it's just bringing all the things that you're already doing that are already really good about your practice and your work to light. You mentioned something about architects being a bit sus about it. And yeah, you definitely do get that. And it happens a lot in creative industries because we just want to do the work, right? We're just like, I'm doing a good job of the work. Why do I also have to sell myself constantly? And you just don't want to feel smarmy. But the trick is basically being honest, right? So if you're being really authentic in how you represent yourself and it's all accurate, then there's nothing to be afraid of.
I want to be interesting to dive into your process as well, because you kind of touched on it slightly at the start of that answer, in the sense that all the information or all the body of work or everything, or your ethos or your methodology or your practice process or whatever is all there. We're just not very good at communicating it. And I think something that we took through from the process with you, more than the final outcome, the new look and font and imagery and all that sort of thing, what we took out of that was the process and unpacking who we were as a practice and what we wanted to portray or how we wanted to be portrayed, and having that package in the background that helped inform all your decision making, but also our voice moving forward. Do you want to kind of go through your process a little bit there?
So it starts with strategy, and you just touched on the first part of it, really, which is making sure you understand yourself really well. And of course, me making sure I understand you really well. So overall, the strategy phase is about pulling out what really matters to people. And, what does your ideal client need to hear from you? What are you already doing in your practice that's meaningful to them? And we start thinking about how we can bring this to light and what exactly needs to be brought to light in order for your practice to feel a little bit more human and in order to connect with them. So the process is basically workshop. I ask a bunch of hard questions and we have a really long conversation about who you are, what informs your work, your process, and what offerings you have, of course, and make sure that, we really dive deep on understanding you And then from there, it's understanding your context. So that's your competitors and also your audience. So audience is branding jargon, but when I say audience, it's just basically who is your brand supposed to be speaking to. Generally, that's going to be your ideal client. Occasionally, it can also be people who would refer you to your ideal client. You can have multiple audience groups, but if you understand them really well, that means that you can speak directly to them, right? And I also mentioned competitors. It's really just, important to look at what are other people doing, because that's part of shaping a point of difference. You can't force it. It has to be genuine, but you also can't claim X thing is our point of difference if like 5 other practices also do that. And which can be challenging. And yeah, you also want to make sure you don't look like everybody else, because that's quite confusing for clients if they're out looking and everybody looks the same and talks the same.
Quickly on that point, it was one of the talking points that I had. I'll let you continue, but that must be probably one of your biggest challenges, and the challenge in architecture in general, because I feel like we are all very much to a degree cut from the same cloth. And we had the same discussion when working through our re-strategy, was that you're kind of taking your influence from your previous practice or where you've worked before, and you've brought that forward because that's kind of all you know. And you kind of get a lot of these copycat firms, and architecture seems like through a lineage. And you're going to see that in the, beige advertising or branding or even naming of businesses kind of across the board. Is that like differentiation or new direction like one of the hardest thing to tease out?
Probably not, honestly. I mean, when there are a bunch of businesses with similar offerings, there's always going to be cliches. Architecture, it's like everybody saying that they're award-winning, innovative, etc. Whatever buzzword there is at the time, there's different buzzwords for like different sub niches in architecture, I've noticed. And a lot of the time, those cliches are not great, but occasionally the cliches are there because they're true and they make sense. And I think it's okay to occasionally say X thing is a benefit of working with our practice, even if other practices say it too. That's like bound to happen, but something about you should be unique. Not everything about you can or should be unique, but something should be. And
Sure.
what I find is that there's always something. There's a reason why an architect is going to go off and work for themselves and have their own practice. And it's usually going to be more than just, I want to make more money, because there are easier ways. There
The
are
wrong
way
profession.
easier ways to make
It's
more
definitely
money.
the wrong profession.
Yeah, but it's like you're starting your own practice because you have something that you want to do that you haven't been able to do at previous practices.
Sure, yeah.
Right? A lot of the time. So, your point of difference might not be what you thought it might have been. I can't remember what you said yours might have been in our conversation, but I
I'll
always
draw that out somewhere.
I always ask, but it's really figuring out your point of differences comes from that Venn diagram that I touched a second ago of like making sure I understand you really well from lots of different angles, and then also understanding your context really well. Oftentimes, your point of difference is going to be kind of a mixture of things. It'll be a combination of your niche, your approach, the access people have to you, your size, and where exactly you are in the world. There is, of course, the possibility of having like that magic point of difference where it's like, yeah, nobody else is really doing this. We actually have a really unique offering. And it doesn't have to be that perfect thing either. You just need to have a clear perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So back to the process. So we kind of talked about finding your selves in a way through your sort of like interview process and the way that you kind of unpack what the practice does and what it's up to, and what you're wanting to do and what you're wanting to achieve. At what point do you take all that information and go, all right, I'm going to now trying to turn this into a design outcome that's going to be like logo, color, merchandising, website, tone of voice, all that sort of thing?
I find that working with architects, they are the least surprised by my process compared to working with some other groups. I think you guys have a real appreciation for the research side of things and the strategy side of things. But to answer your question, at what point do I feel comfortable actually like getting on the tools and making things? It will be after workshop, 1 or 2 workshops with the client, depending on the size of the business. And, feeling really comfortable that I understand you really, really well. And then after I've gone and done research on competitors, part of the workshop is also talking to you about your audience. So your ideal clients, usually different groups. I tend to work with practices who have experience. Like they're not really like brand new. They might be newer, but they're going to have some lived experience working with their ideal people. So, it's making sure we flesh that out together. It's not really like a hypothetical ideal client because you've actually been working with them, which is fantastic.
So repeat these people again and again and again and again. Yeah.
Yeah. And as much as possible, right? And it's not like, you just have to find the common thread between your ideal clients. It's not like they're all going to be exactly the same type of person. So once I understand those things, that's when I feel comfortable actually ideating visually. And, my first step there is kind of going wide. So thinking, okay, maybe this could work, maybe that could work, and just sort of testing things. And then you land on something that ends up fitting all the criteria that you've already set out. And something that will be, like an accurate expression of everything we've just, unveiled.
It's funny hearing you talk about it now. Having gone through the process with you, it didn't feel like this. But hearing you talk about it now, it feels like exactly how we approach a design process. Like we get a brief, we get all the information, all the parameters, and then we create something for the client that they may have never thought of before, but it's answering all their questions, and when you're right, when it ticks all the boxes, basically. It's actually super adjacent, which is funny because I didn't feel like it was like that when we were going through the process. maybe because I was cagey.
You weren't. You were very open. But I think that it's probably just you don't have the clarity of what's happening when you're going through the process, because I'm asking you a lot of intense questions. You have to be a little bit vulnerable through the process, and it's a little bit scary. It's a bit of a leap, rebranding your business and putting a new version of yourself out there.
Do you find that going through that rebrand, the emotions of it side of things, obviously, like I had a strong attachment to our previous, the previous branding I'd created from scratch, started my own thing, and you sort of have this level of connection to it. Other clients that you've worked with, have they been similar? And, I guess it kind of varies depending on their time in practice and how long they've been working or how established their business is. But do you find that's the hardest thing, is to kind of separate from what was there before?
It's often a conversation, like how, when we started working together, there was that question of how much of it is going to change. Are we going to go through the strategy process and realize that some parts of it are appropriate, right? We went through the strategy process and my advice was that none of it was really appropriate. We needed to just redo it.
Yeah.
Go big or go home,
Yeah. Which was a hard pill to swallow at the time.
Yeah, but you also swallowed it with grace. It was not, you weren't going to not listen to basically all of the research and evidence.
Well, I think that's where the confidence comes into it, because you're so thorough in the process that, and it's the same with design, right? It's similar to us when we're designing a house. We don't just go, oh, thanks for your brief, here's a plan. Like, with no back thought or evidence as to where and why and how and what. And you're the same thing, right? It was challenging for sure, but the overwhelming weight of research and evidence and everything kind of convinces you that it's legit and it's okay. It's the right direction to take.
Exactly.
And I guess this is where just a little side note question, but do you ever have somebody come in and immediately you're like, that's the brand that I need to give them? or does it always unveil through a rigorous design process?
I don't think I've ever really, different designers might tell you different things, but I'm very, very strategy oriented. So I don't really tend to think about the possibilities until I understand everything, because from how I've worked as a designer is I don't have ideas until I have the meat behind the ideas. So, like with experience, of course, you can maybe make some assumptions, but I try not to, because clients can really surprise you. And I think before you go into a strategy session and you have those really, really in-depth conversations, you might be influenced by their current identity. And that's not really the point, because if they're working with me, something about the current identity isn't working. So I don't want to have that influence me. So yeah, it really comes out of the conversation. And then once I have all the information, then I feel like I'll actually start getting some organic ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's generally the catalyst for, like you just said, something with their current identities not working, or it's not clicking, or struggling with it? What's usually the catalyst for somebody approaching you? Is it change in ownership, new business growth, clientele dropping off, new what's the word I'm looking for, area kind of work, like myself just moving down to Dunedin? Are those the sort of catalysts, or is it more just people are feeling like they need a refresh, they need an uplift? You kind of see brands do it all the time. Spotify just changed its logo and everyone went up and
Did they?
yeah, they changed it to like a mirror ball, I think, and then everybody.
Oh yes, yeah. The disco ball.
So I feel like big brands like that kind of go through a rebrand every 5 years or something, just to try and stay fresh and relevant. Doesn't feel like this is in the same ballpark. This is more like there's always been a driving factor behind approaching you to work.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is we're doing what we're doing for money.
Yeah.
We're running businesses. So there's a commercial driver of some kind. And yeah, I definitely wouldn't recommend rebranding every 5 years. Yeah, it would be a nightmare. That would be a nightmare. And a brand, in order to be strong, is actually going to have longevity. Like, think about the power of a brand if it exists. And it's similar across 15, 20, 30 years. You know what I mean? But the catalyst is usually a practice isn't winning the type of work they want to be winning, or they're not winning it as easily as they should be winning it. So, I mean, that was something I think we spoke about. There's a very, very common conversation that I have with my clients before we've actually worked together is, if everyone could just meet us, then they would know that we're the right choice. Like, as soon as we actually meet a client in real life, then they know that we're right. And so it's a lot on your shoulders personally as an individual. Your brand should be doing that work for you. Your brand should be an extension of yourselves and of your work, so that when people look at you online, when they look at your signage, they start to get a little bit of confidence in you. If they're the right person, it should resonate with them. And they should start to feel like, okay, I think these people could be the right ones for us. So a lot of that's probably the main catalyst, is just feeling like there's that disconnect where the image doesn't match up with the quality of what you're actually giving.
Yeah, sure.
Or that there's a little bit of a communication breakdown at some point, because there's so many ways that you communicate with a potential client before they actually meet you. You know?
Yeah, it's a long courting process. Often,
for sure.
Often which leads in being dumped.
Yeah. Well, it's huge investment for people.
Yeah,
and
it is.
They're gonna and ah for a while before they contact you, a lot of the time, at least in probably most architectural niches. It's about having a holistic, positive identity for your practice, not just having to rely on face-to-face meetings.
Yeah. On that point, how much do you think it plays? Obviously, we talked about like the business brand, like an architectural company, but so often that is comprised of individuals, be they directors or staff or whoever. How much does their personal identity, I guess, or branding play into your decision making in building the business's brand? And vice versa, like once that business brand is built, how much do you kind of encourage them to work on their own personal stuff? Because inevitably they end up going hand in hand, right? We're never that separated from our architectural practice as architects, I find.
No. And you shouldn't be, right? Personal brand is a funny one. And I don't like the term personal brand, but it's also because it's like people are people, not brands. And I think that's one of those terms where creatives like you and I can get the ick, be like, ugh, personal brand. No.
Makes you think of like Instagram influencers and stuff.
Absolutely. And I have some interior design clients who do a little bit of that, and it's authentic to them and it's great. But for the majority of people, that's not going to work. I haven't met an architect yet who does that kind of thing.
Surely there's someone out there.
Surely, yeah. But I actually haven't. I mean, there's different ways of influencing, right? And people do it to different degrees. But yeah, personal brand is important despite my distaste for the term. And that's just because people connect with people better than anything else. Like we're pretty hardwired for that. You know, a branding exercise for a business is trying to expand that beyond everything relying on you, like I just said. But at the same time, if you're willing to be the face of your business, that will also be an asset.
It must be far more relevant when you're named. If you've got a named practice, to me that seems like it's more important at that point because you have no separation between identity and practice. Whereas if you're behind an arbitrary name like we are, a RET, it could be anybody. You know, do you think that there's more of a focus on the personal brand, to use a taboo word, when people have named practices?
I know what you mean, definitely. I mean, I could use myself as an example. I am going to one day name my studio something other than my own name, but it is a difficult process. I think potentially, but it's probably less relevant than you'd think. You know, there are definitely so many architecture brands, so many architects who use a surname or just their name. But also aren't the face of the business. And then you find the reverse. My general opinion, though, is if you are willing to be the face of your business, it will be positive for you. And that doesn't have to be this like huge, massive thing. It just means that if you do a speaking event or if you judge something or whatever it is, don't be afraid to kind of share where you work. Share that you're the director of X architects or architecture. And don't be afraid to, pop a photo of it on the feed. That's generally, when we're talking about personal branding and architecture, that's kind of more what we're looking at. As opposed to like doing reels, having paid partnerships, that kind of thing, where you're getting into like the influencer space.
Yeah, I think that's also kind of ethically grey ground for registered architects as well.
Yeah. Totally. There's ways to have a personal brand where it feels organic and natural to you. If you're like a super, super shy person and you never want to show your face, like it's not the end of the world. But most people are comfortable with the smaller recommendations that I have because it's going to be something that's, already reflecting the work they're doing. It's sort of like, well, you're already doing these speaking events. You might as well not hide it.
Yeah.
You might as well associate it with your practice.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, like the podcast is a classic example, right? It's a personal thing, but it's inevitably adjacent. And so why not promote it on our feed? And it's been a nice way for us to kind of get exposure, I guess, nationally. Not that it was ever the intent, but it was a nice outcome.
I mean, that's often the thing with PR. This is kind of a sub-tangent, but, a lot of practices focus very much on PR before they've focused on brand building. And it's because they think, if I get onto a podcast or if I get onto this magazine, then I'm going to get like an influx of inquiries. But I find that PR is much better used as like a way to connect, right? More broadly with people in your industry. It's an image booster, but it's not really like a reliable source of leads.
Would you say that that's a mistake within the profession? Is there more of a focus on awards programs, publications, like you said, PR, public speaking events, what have you, over actual focus on brand identity, voice, vision, those sorts of things?
Yes, I think it can be for sure. And not to knock PR efforts, they're really important and they play a part. But I think that there can be a little bit of a gap in knowledge where people think it's going to equal leads, you know? But the reality is, most of the time it won't. You do get some people who get really fortunate with those things. I remember like Lisa Webb saying that a video, like the episode that she was on, like she gets inquiries from that still all the time.
Yeah, that was massive for her.
Yeah. So there still definitely are exceptions like that, but they're exceptions. The rule is that if you're a small practice, if you're starting out, you don't need breadth of exposure. You need depth. You need exposure with the right people. You need the right people to connect with you, right? And that is more effectively done through brand identity and just consistency with your marketing than trying to get published in those early stages. Yeah.
That consistency with the marketing thing's a good point to raise and something I'd like to chat about a bit further. I think it's something that we have talked about. It's in our brand strategy. And it's something that we constantly review, very rarely action. And I think a lot of it comes down to time, availability, all that sort of thing. How important do you think that regularity is? Because I think we had this discussion and it is important, but do you think it is really that much of a game changer?
It's a classic struggle. I'm guilty as well. I'm pretty good at posting regularly. I just set myself the goal of one post a week, but occasionally you're just slammed. Like you have so much work on and you need to focus on serving your clients. Sometimes, that shit happens when you're running a business, but I encourage my clients to strive for that consistency and strive for what is going to be regular for you.
Yeah, right.
I have an interior design client in Sydney who's just great at posting. He can post 5 times a week. But for most people, it's going to be once a week, once every 2 weeks. The consistency, you asked how important is it, right? Yeah. It's pretty important. It's pretty important. If you don't have that proof that you're a functioning business and like actually doing things, then people might have the doubt that you're still, available.
Operational. Yeah.
Are you operating? Basically, if you can only manage to post once a month, going to be like the one and done, like, oh, I won this award and now I've made it. I never have to do marketing again.
Yeah, the awards program's a funny one because you win an award and you expect there to be some level of engagement from people. And my experience so far is that there is none at all. And it's kind of surprising. And I do wonder how much of that is a reflection of the fact that many awards programs are targeted back at the profession rather than out to the wider public.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But also I think it is, you sort of like rest on your laurels a bit. You're kind of like, yeah, I've done the thing and I've been recognized for it. I don't need to try for a wee while. And so you kind of sit back and hope that that's doing the work when it's not.
Yeah. I mean, and that's largely because the awards in architecture are for the industry by the industry.
Yeah.
Winning an award is not a bad thing. It's a great thing.
It's awesome.
But it's more something that's like enriching for you and your design community. I don't see it as, well, it isn't a way to get clients. I haven't talked to a single client of mine who said, yeah, we got so many clients after we won this award. It just doesn't work that way. But it's a booster, pretty similar to those PR efforts. Like if you have awards under your belt, it can reassure people that you're legit and that you're worth the money.
Mm-hmm.
So it's still a positive thing. It's just not a source of leads. And I think that a lot of architects get those kind of image boosters and lead sources a little bit confused.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. And in trying to target those leads, how important is it? I know one thing that we worked through with you through the strategy side of the rebranding was voice or tone of voice, and like using this language consistently, using these, let's call them buzzwords, these buzzwords in your language that kind of outline what you do and how you develop it and how you deliver it, et cetera, et cetera. When you're looking at an architect's website or branding or something, do you notice that the successful ones distinctly lean into that tone of voice and that kind of narrative that they've built behind them? And can you see when that's empty and hollow?
It's difficult for me to know what's empty or hollow before getting to know a business.
Sure.
Same for everyone, really. But I would say tone of voice is definitely relevant. You need to be speaking in a way that matches who you are as a practice. It needs to match the visual identity. It needs to match, the mindset that you bring to the work. If there's a mismatch between tone of voice or any part of your brand identity and the way that you deliver work, that's not a positive thing, even if it looks really good. If it ends up being inaccurate, it's not good, because people work with you and then they find, oh, that's actually so different from what I thought it was going to be. And then it kind of kills word of mouth, right?
Yeah, sure.
Tone of voice is important. It's part of writing in a way that represents you accurately. The main thing I see is like maybe not so much a tone of voice problem, but just the use of jargon or the use of, architecture is an academic field. You guys have years of study behind you, and there's certain ways that you speak about things. I can relate. There's certain ways that I speak about things that does not make sense to you.
Yeah.
And it's really about saying things in a way that makes sense to your ideal client.
Mm-hmm.
So, you might say innovative, one of those buzzwords, right? And I'm like, okay, it's not a bad thing to say that you're innovative, but what the heck does it actually mean? What about that innovation is meaningful to your ideal client? And is there something there that we can, take out and put in words that's going to make sense to them and actually connect with them? So much of it is just about clarity, communicating things really clearly and saying what you really mean, as opposed to using language that is trained language,
How much do you think that your brand imagery, color, tone, font, do you think that they all need to marry to kind of create that holistic view or vision of what your practice is? I mean, you've done it so successfully with ours, I think, in delivering what we unpacked and what we wanted to create. But I look at what we had previously, which to me at the time felt fine. I now look back on it and I'm like, that, like you said before, massive disconnect. Do you think that the architecture firms or design firms, interior designers, builders, whoever they might be, let themselves down because they've got all the work here? Maybe they've got the vision, they've got the right tone, they've got the right, obviously they're doing projects and everything, but then this one little part just drops them down the peg because it's not feeding into the main body of who they are. Does that make sense?
But are you talking about consistency, basically?
I guess so. Imagine if you're delivering really amazing projects, you're able to convey what you do really well, good word of mouth and everything, but you've got a shit website, or your branding or your logo or your color palette or whatever just lets you down. Do you think that aligning those to the good stuff that you're doing has a massive uplift in your exposure or brand identity or your success?
Yeah, it does. It makes it easier for people to connect with you. So if you are doing one aspect of your branding quite well, but only one aspect, then not everybody's going to see the good part. They're going to see the shit parts too.
Yeah.
And so that kind of limits your ability to connect with people. An analogy that I use is if you have a really good Instagram feed, for instance, and you've curated that really beautiful, but then people click through to your website once they're actually doing some deeper research about working with you, and the website's not so good. Maybe it's like a really basic Squarespace template, doesn't really like uplift the brand in any way, doesn't really show who you are anyway. It creates this feeling of people feeling like they've seen through a facade.
Yeah.
So that inconsistency, you can definitely still get work. Don't get me wrong. You can still get work, but it's going to be more challenging and it'll be harder to command premium pricing. So it's part of being professional, really.
Having that full alignment. I can think of practices I've worked at previously, where we were before we talked to you, and many other examples of not necessarily architects, but industry adjacent people. I know you've been working with a builder that we work with quite consistently, and we've all struggled with that. We've delivered maybe 75% of the right business direction, but it's that 25% that's not getting us over the line, I guess, on a lot of work. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's reassurance for people. And if you think about it as a communication gap, I think that's probably the best way to kind of conceptualize it. It's not about coming up with a thing and being smarmy and forcing yourself down people's throats. It's just about communicating well. And if you're not communicating well, there's going to be lost opportunity for sure.
Yeah, I think the smarmy aspect of it is the biggest hurdle to overcome. Is that instant kind of reluctance to, maybe it's even in a reluctance to think of your practice as a brand, and as a business rather than just this creative enterprise, which is what we are at the end of the day. And I think that's what we as architects struggle with in general, is the fact that we are business and we are a brand and we kind of have to promote ourselves adequately. Otherwise, you do yourself a disservice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're a creative enterprise. You're also a business. Ultimately, it's a commercial venture and doesn't, how I would respond is you might feel like the concept of it is going to be really uncomfortable and smarmy and disingenuous or whatever. But then when you're actually doing it, you realize it's not that. If you're working with a good brand strategist, a good brand designer, it really is about solving that communication gap. It's not about inventing anything that isn't real. And so there's nothing smarmy about that at all. It's actually really fantastic. It's a way of connecting with people. So that's how I tend to think about it. And when it comes to the everyday marketing stuff, if you're just a bit uncomfortable posting, my advice would be just force yourself for a little bit. Find a marketing method that feels genuine for you, something where you can actually offer people some value. You can actually start to make some connections. Choose one thing and just try it. And actually doing it is the best way to realize oh, cool, people are commenting on this. I'm actually having good conversations. People actually know who the hell I am now.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So it's one of those things, like anything that makes us uncomfortable in business, it gets better with exposure.
That, and I would also add to that, approaching someone like yourself to do brand, if you're not that confident in posting or preparing copy or vocalizing what you do or anything, there's specialists out there that can help with that sort of thing as well. And I think that's one skill that we definitely have as architects or as the design community, is we're quite good at finding the people to help us answer the problems. And I just kind of implore people to continue with that same approach with your business as well. You don't have to try and do everything, I guess, what I'm trying to say at the end of the day. Because I've found that with the voice side of things, writing copy for yourself, commenting on projects, preparing award applications and things like that, quite difficult to comment on your own work, I find. And a couple of times I've just been I need somebody else to do this for me. You sit down with them and they get to be a specialist for a day, kind of give them all the parameters. And I found the outcomes to be really successful. They can capture your voice and you don't have to try and do it yourself. And it's better than getting AI to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, the AI writing is people are so suspicious of it these days, and they should be. I'm not a fan. There's a lot of telltale signs, and it can do a lot of harm to your reputation. So I don't recommend it. But what you said about outsourcing, very true. I mean, as business owners, we have to make these decisions. There's only so many hats that everyone can wear.
Yeah.
Only so many things that you can take on yourself. And branding, if you know who you are as a practice, but you feel like there's a gap in people understanding it, you probably have a branding problem and you should probably get a professional to help you. Lots of architects are reasonably comfortable choosing a font or setting up a templated site in Squarespace, but you can only get so far. It's a bit like me drawing my own dream house.
Yeah.
The outcome would be far, far, far better if I had an architect do it, to say the least. There's that same need for craft and expertise in graphic design and branding.
That's the best way of putting it.
Good. I'm glad it resonates.
I mean, like that, putting it in that simplest term, you're right. In terms of it resonating, that's the best way to do it. And we'll ourselves employ you to not try and draw your own dream house, to employ us to do it for you, because we're the specialists, right? And so it's exactly the same thing.
Exactly. It's like I just don't have the knowledge to do it. I wouldn't personally ever try. Clearly, I would be a more educated architecture client because of my work, but...
Well, you're the risky ones.
But also, I don't actually know anything about building science, or you don't want to start getting on the tools unless you actually know the stuff, right?
Yeah. To finish, what are 3 key things that you would recommend the design professions, architects, builders, whoever might be listening, who considering brand and strategy and all that sort of thing? What are 3 things that you think are worth them either considering or employing?
Like employing somebody else to help them with?
More like employing in their business strategy. Couple of little tips and tricks.
I think that, I think that getting help from somebody else with branding should only happen when you're in a certain stage in business. So maybe I can cover the sort of pre-branding steps. In order for a brand to be effective, it has to be authentic. I feel like I've talked about that a lot. It has to represent something real. So therefore, in order to be distinctive, you have to first build an offering that's somehow distinctive. That's step 1. I'm not saying you need to be this like mind-blowing disruptor of the industry, but you definitely need a clear perspective. And ideally, you'll also have a clear niche. Being clear on that is number 1. You can't build a good brand without that. The second thing I would say is understanding who is your ideal client. Like I said, if you understand them, you can speak to them. If you try to speak to everybody, you speak to no one. And you actually should be repelling some people. For a brand new practice who doesn't actually have any work under their belt yet, that can be a little bit more hypothetical. You're kind of taking some guesses because you haven't actually been to market yet. But if you've been in business for even a year or 2, you're going to have like real data about your ideal client, most likely. So if you get specific on that and really drill into who they are, you're going to be better at speaking to them or speaking in a way that makes sense to them. And then the third thing would be probably to decide what message you want your practice to convey and formulate a simple plan around how you're going to do that. You can do it through wording. So having a really clear bio is always important. But you can also do it through visuals. And I am a believer that a picture says 1,000 words or whatever the saying is. Yeah, having something that is genuinely distinctive about your practice is step 1, because you can't invent it later.
Yeah,
if you want a distinctive brand, my best advice is to actually start with the offer. Start with what you do. Start with your niche. Is there a gap in the market that you can fill? And then, audience, and decide what the message is going to be. Start thinking about how you're going to communicate that message.
Awesome. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thanks, mate.
Hopefully that answers your question. That was a hard one.
It does. Sorry. I reckon we'll call it time there unless there's anything else you want to...
The only thing we didn't touch on that we considered was Why do all architects look the same? I think that a lot of it is really just as simple as they are forming a new business and they're looking to their peers. They feel like in order for me to be a legitimate architecture practice, I need to
I have
look
to look like them.
like another architecture practice. And you fall into a trap of looking at what other people are doing. And it's so difficult when you're doing something from scratch yourself to kind of get a read on how it feels. So you kind of just default to doing what others are doing. I think that's a really big part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Nice. Thanks, Emma.
Thanks, Sam.